Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. It is a quiet evening in 1776 in the modest lodgings of Panmure House in Edinburgh's Canongate, one of the ancient streets that slopes down from the imposing castle toward Holyrood Palace. A man sits at his writing desk, surrounded by towers of books and papers stacked precariously on every available surface. The flickering light of expensive wax candles casting dancing shadows across his concentrated face. He is 53 years old, has never married despite opportunities and societal expectations, lives with his elderly mother who manages his domestic life with patient devotion, and has spent the better part of a decade, years of intense labor and revision, crafting what will become one of the most influential books ever written, a work that will fundamentally reshape how humanity understands itself and the mysterious processes of economic life. This is Adam Smith, and tonight we journey through the entire extraordinary life of the man who changed economics forever, who gave us new ways to think about wealth and poverty, labor and capital, freedom and prosperity. A philosopher who became an economist almost by accident, following his curiosity wherever it led. A professor who never sought fame or fortune, yet achieved both. Before we begin tonight's journey, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps others discover these explorations of history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. So, settle in and prepare to walk through 18th century Scotland with a man who spent his life thinking deeply about how humans live together, who believed that commerce could civilize nations, who saw invisible hands where others saw only chaos, who understood that the pursuit of wealth and the pursuit of virtue need not be enemies. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Nearly Became a Gypsy. The year is 1723 in the ancient kingdom of Fife, in the small but bustling coastal town of Kirkcaldy. The town sits on the northern shore of the Firth of Forth, looking across the water toward Edinburgh, that great capital city visible on clear days as a hazy outline against the southern sky. Kirkcaldy in this era is a place of salt pans that steam and hiss along the shore, coal mines that burrow into the earth supplying fuel for heating and industry, fishing boats that brave the often treacherous waters of the Firth, merchant vessels that connect this small Scottish town to London and Amsterdam, and ports even more distant. Linen weavers work their looms in crowded workshops, creating cloth that is gaining renown across Britain. Nail makers hammer metal in their forges. The 1707 Act of Union between Scotland and England is still recent history, only 16 years past, still reshaping the economic landscape in ways both subtle and profound, opening new opportunities for Scottish merchants to trade with England's American colonies while closing others, stirring resentments that will eventually explode in Jacobite rebellion. The town has perhaps 1,500 souls, just large enough to have its own customs house staffed with officials who monitor the flow of goods, its own small bureaucracy of clerks and comptrollers, its own vital connection to the wider world of trade and commerce that flows through these waters. Into this world, in early June of 1723, a baby is baptized. We do not know his exact birth date, a common situation in an era when many births went unrecorded, only that on the 5th of June, he is carried to the parish church and given the name Adam Smith at the baptismal font. It is the same name as his father, but the boy will never know the man who gave it to him, will never hear his voice or feel his embrace. Adam Smith the Elder, a lawyer by training and comptroller of customs for Kirkcaldy by profession, a man who had worked his way into a position of modest respect and stability, died 5 months before his son was born, leaving behind a widow in her late 20s, Margaret Douglas. Margaret comes from a family of landowners in the surrounding countryside, the Douglas family of Strathendry, a family with substantial property and enough means to provide security even without a husband's income. This financial cushion will prove crucial in young Adam's development. The child is sickly from the start, frail and delicate, requiring constant attention and anxious care. Margaret pours all her love into this fragile boy, this unexpected gift, this posthumous son who is all she has left of her husband, becoming perhaps overly protective, certainly devoted beyond measure. They will live together for nearly 60 years, an intimacy and dependence that will mark Smith throughout his life. Young Adam grows slowly but surely under his mother's watchful eye and devoted care. He is an odd child, from early on quiet when other children are boisterous, bookish when they are active, prone to strange habits even in infancy that will intensify as he ages. Later in life, people will remark on his peculiar mannerisms, his tendency to talk to himself while walking the streets, to walk alone murmuring about topics known only to him, to forget entirely where he is or what he is doing when lost in thought, to stand at windows for hours apparently doing nothing while his mind ranges across vast territories of ideas. But in these early years, he is simply a small boy in a small town, learning his letters from his mother and later from the local schoolmaster, listening to the sounds of the port with its cries of gulls and creaking of ropes and shouts of sailors, watching ships come and go with their mysterious cargoes from places he can only imagine. And then, when Adam is 3 or 4 years old, something extraordinary happens that will become the defining story of his childhood. The family is visiting relatives in the countryside at Margaret's father's substantial house at Strathendry, by the banks of the River Leven, where the water runs clear over stones and through meadows. It is a summer day, warm and drowsy, the kind where adults grow sleepy after a large midday meal and children wander off to explore and play. Someone notices the boy is missing. At first there is no great alarm. Surely he must be playing nearby, perhaps by the river watching the water, perhaps in the garden or the stables. But minutes turn into a quarter hour, then half an hour, then an hour, and panic begins to set in. Where is the child? Has he fallen into the river? Has he wandered into the woods and become lost? A gentleman arrives on the road with news. He has seen a woman, one of the traveling people, the Roma who wander through Scotland, or perhaps the Scottish tinkers who move from place to place, mending pots and doing odd jobs, carrying a crying child along the road toward the town of Leslie, several miles distant. The description matches young Adam. Immediately, a rescue party forms. Margaret's brother, a substantial man accustomed to taking charge, leads men on horseback into the woods, following the road the stranger described, riding hard. They find the woman in Leslie Wood, among the trees. The moment she sees the approaching men, she sets the child down on the ground and flees into the deeper woods, disappearing before they can question her. They gather up young Adam, crying and bewildered and frightened, and carry him home on horseback to his distraught mother, who clutches him and weeps with relief. Years later, John Ray, Smith's first major biographer, writing in the 1890s, will note dryly that Smith would have made a poor gypsy indeed, given his absent-minded nature. But consider what this incident must have really meant. Consider Margaret, a widow still grieving her husband, nearly losing her only son as well. The terror of those hours not knowing where he was or whether she would ever see him again. Consider what it might have meant to the boy himself, snatched from familiar surroundings, carried away by a stranger, experiencing powerlessness and fear. Some scholars have speculated that this traumatic incident helped shape Smith's later emphasis on sympathy and moral sentiments, his deep understanding of human vulnerability. We cannot know for certain, but the boy who was returned to Kirkcaldy would grow into a man who thought deeply about what holds societies together, about how strangers can cooperate for mutual benefit, even without personal affection. Chapter 2: Glasgow and the Light of Learning. Glasgow in 1737 is a city transforming before everyone's eyes, and young Adam Smith, arriving at age 14 to begin his university studies, walks into this transformation at precisely the right moment. The union with England, initially resented by many Scots as a betrayal of independence and a loss of sovereignty, has opened up trade with the American colonies in ways that are reshaping the entire Scottish economy. Glasgow's merchants are seizing this opportunity with both hands and remarkable entrepreneurial energy. Tobacco arrives from Virginia and Maryland in ever-increasing quantities, creating immense fortunes for the shrewd traders known as the tobacco lords, who will soon build grand mansions and dominate Glasgow society. Sugar from the Caribbean plantations, cotton, rum, all the goods of empire flow through Glasgow's port on the River Clyde. Wealth is being made on a scale previously unimaginable in this part of Scotland. Stone buildings are rising along the streets, replacing older timber structures. Merchants' houses grow more elaborate. The city pulses with commercial energy and optimism about the future. It is the perfect laboratory for a young man who will one day think systematically about the sources of national prosperity, about how trade creates wealth, about the springs of economic growth and development. The visual contrast between old Scotland and new commercial Scotland is everywhere apparent in Glasgow's changing streetscape. Young Adam Smith, walking from his lodgings to the university each day, would have witnessed this transformation firsthand, storing observations that will later emerge in his economic writings. But young Adam Smith has not come to study commerce, at least not formally. He is enrolled to study moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, and he has arrived at precisely the right moment in intellectual history as well as economic history. The university is becoming a center of what will later be called the Scottish Enlightenment, a remarkable flowering of intellectual achievement, concentrated in Scotland's universities and drawing rooms that will produce David Hume, Adam Ferguson, William Robertson, Thomas Reid, and of course Smith himself. The atmosphere is one of inquiry, debate, open-minded investigation, the conviction that reason and careful observation can illuminate the human condition, that the methods of natural philosophy, what we would call science, can be extended to understanding society and morality and politics. The university itself is relatively small, only about a dozen professors, but what it lacks in size, it makes up for in intellectual energy and innovation. The old regent system, where a single tutor taught students all subjects, has recently been replaced by specialized professorships, allowing for deeper expertise. The professors are young, ambitious, excited about new ideas. They see themselves as part of a broader European Enlightenment while maintaining Scotland's distinctive intellectual traditions. Smith's most important teacher, the man who will influence him more profoundly than any other in his entire life, is Francis Hutcheson, the professor of moral philosophy. Hutcheson is 44 years old when Smith arrives, at the height of his powers as a thinker and teacher. He had been appointed to the chair in 1730, bringing with him fresh ideas that challenged the prevailing Calvinist orthodoxy of Scottish intellectual life. To young Adam Smith, Hutcheson is nothing short of a revelation. Unlike the dry scholastics of the previous generation who lectured in Latin from ancient texts and demanded rote memorization of established doctrines, Hutcheson lectures in English, making philosophy accessible and alive to his students, many of whom would struggle with extended Latin discourse. He is famous for his teaching style. He paces energetically as he speaks, engaging his students, directly with his gaze and gestures, asking them searching questions, encouraging them to think for themselves rather than simply absorbing and repeating received wisdom. He creates a sense of dialogue, even in a lecture hall. His subject is the nature of moral judgment, how we human beings know right from wrong, what motivates our actions, what makes a society just and good, what are the foundations of ethics and politics. These are timeless questions, but Hutcheson approaches them with fresh methods and arrives at novel conclusions. Hutcheson argues for an innate moral sense, a natural human capacity for benevolence and sympathy toward others that is as much a part of human nature as our capacity for sight or hearing. We do not need elaborate philosophical arguments or divine revelation to know that cruelty is wrong and kindness is right, he insists. We feel it immediately through this moral sense. Moreover, Hutcheson proposes that the greatest happiness of the greatest number should be the measure of right and wrong, an idea that will later be developed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill into systematic utilitarianism. These ideas will influence Smith profoundly in his student years, even though he will later modify and complicate them significantly, moving away from the idea of a simple moral sense toward a more sophisticated and nuanced psychological account, based on sympathy as an imaginative process. The young student flourishes in this environment in ways he never could have in a more conventional educational setting. He is not particularly social by nature. His odd mannerisms and tendency towards solitary contemplation make him stand apart from the more boisterous life of the college, from the drinking clubs and athletics that occupy other students. But intellectually, he is fully engaged, perhaps more engaged than he has ever been. He attends Hutcheson's lectures faithfully, taking copious notes that he will review and think about later. He reads voraciously in the college library, working his way through ancient philosophers and modern ones, through literature and history. He begins to develop his own ideas in conversation with fellow students late into the night, and in the essays he writes for his courses. He is particularly struck by Hutcheson's passionate emphasis on liberty, on reason, on free speech and open inquiry as essential goods in themselves, on the dangers of tyranny, whether exercised by kings or by churches. Hutcheson had himself faced accusations of heresy from more conservative Presbyterian ministers, and this experience had only strengthened his commitment to intellectual freedom. These values of liberty and free inquiry, absorbed at Glasgow under Hutcheson's influence, will stay with Smith for the rest of his life and will shape all his mature work. Smith also encounters the practical world of commerce during his Glasgow years in ways that will prove formative for his later economic thinking. The city's successful merchants are not remote figures locked away in counting houses, but active participants in the intellectual and civic life of the university community. They attend public lectures on various topics, engage with professors in discussion, serve on the university's governing board, contribute to funding. Some have genuine intellectual interests and see the university as a source of useful knowledge. Young Smith observes these merchants carefully, listens to their conversations about trade and markets and prices, begins to understand how the abstract principles of political economy that are discussed in books connect to the real decisions of real people conducting actual business. This combination of rigorous philosophical training under Hutcheson and regular exposure to commercial life will prove invaluable when he later turns his attention seriously to political economy. In 1740, after 3 extraordinarily productive years at Glasgow, Smith's exceptional performance in his studies earns him a Snell exhibition, a prestigious scholarship that allows talented students from Glasgow to continue their studies at Balliol College, Oxford. The Snell exhibition had been established in the late 17th century and was technically intended to prepare students for careers in the Church of England, though this requirement was not always strictly enforced. For Smith, this is technically a great honor, a magnificent opportunity to study at one of the most famous and ancient universities in the world, an institution that could trace its origins back to medieval times. Smith packs his belongings carefully, says goodbye to his professors, especially to Hutcheson, whom he will later describe as the never-to-be-forgotten Dr. Hutcheson, and to his mother, who is immensely proud, but also worried about her beloved son traveling so far from home into England. He makes the long journey south, several days of uncomfortable travel by coach, crossing the border from Scotland into England. He is 17 years old, brilliant but odd, full of ideas and intellectual ambition, but socially awkward, deeply attached to the Scottish Enlightenment values of liberty and inquiry he has absorbed at Glasgow. He will spend 6 years at Oxford, and he will be miserable almost the entire time, finding in England's most famous university a very different and far less congenial academic culture than the one that had nurtured him so well in Scotland. Chapter 3. Oxford, the Wilderness Years. If Glasgow was all energy and intellectual ferment, Oxford in the 1740s is stagnation wrapped in ancient privilege. This is not entirely fair to Oxford. The institution has its merits and will later reform. But for Adam Smith at this particular moment, it is a profound disappointment. The professors, secure in their endowments and sinecures, rarely bother to teach. They collect their salaries, enjoy their privileges, and leave the students largely to their own devices. The students themselves, many of them wealthy young Englishmen sent to Oxford more for social polish than intellectual development, seem more interested in drinking and sports than in learning. The intellectual atmosphere is conservative to the point of ossification, suspicious of new ideas, actively hostile to the kinds of questions and approaches that had excited Smith at Glasgow. Moreover, Smith is a Scot in England at a particularly delicate time in Anglo-Scottish relations. The Jacobite Rebellion of 1745 erupts while he is at Oxford, an attempt by Charles Edward Stuart, the Young Pretender, to restore the Stuart monarchy to the British throne. The rebellion draws much of its support from Highland Scotland and from Catholics who resent the Protestant Hanoverian succession. It marches south, reaches as far as Derby in England, then retreats and is ultimately crushed with great brutality at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Anti-Scottish feeling runs high in England during and after the rebellion. Smith, never gregarious to begin with, finds himself even more isolated, regarded with suspicion, made to feel unwelcome. He has few friends at Oxford, feels profoundly out of place, misses the intellectual ferment of Glasgow and the comfort of his mother's home in Kirkcaldy. But Smith does not waste these years despite their unhappiness. If the formal education disappoints, he creates his own rigorous program of study. He has access to Balliol's library, one of the great collections of books in Britain, and he uses it ruthlessly and systematically. He reads everything he can find, ancient philosophy from Plato and Aristotle through the Stoics, modern literature in several languages, political theory from Hobbes and Locke, emerging works of economics and natural science, history, ancient and modern. He studies French intensively, learns Italian, improves his already solid foundation in Latin and Greek. He reads widely in English literature, developing a taste for poetry and drama that will influence his later lectures on rhetoric. He essentially constructs his own liberal education, teaching himself what the lazy dons of Oxford will not teach him. It is during the Oxford years that Smith encounters the work of David Hume. Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature had been published in 1739, but it had largely been ignored or misunderstood, famously falling stillborn from the press, as Hume himself later lamented. But Smith reads it, probably around 1744 or 1745, and it strikes him with the force of revelation. Hume's skepticism about reason, his naturalistic approach to human understanding, his psychological acuity, his refusal to accept traditional philosophical answers simply because they are traditional, all of this resonates deeply with Smith. Though the two men have not yet met in person, a kind of intellectual friendship is already forming through Smith's encounter with Hume's work. There is a famous story from Smith's Oxford years that reveals much about both his intellectual independence and the atmosphere of the college. One day, his tutors discover him reading Hume's treatise, which is considered dangerously heterodox, potentially atheistic, certainly not suitable reading for a young man who holds a scholarship originally intended to prepare students for the Presbyterian ministry. They confiscate the book and reprimand Smith severely for reading such dangerous material. But Smith, characteristically, does not apologize or promise to conform. He continues to think his own thoughts, to read what interests him, to form his own judgments. The experience only reinforces his conviction, absorbed from Hutcheson at Glasgow, that intellectual freedom is precious and that authority, whether of church or university, must be questioned when it conflicts with the pursuit of truth. Smith leaves Oxford in 1746, returning to Scotland without fanfare, without the degree he might have earned, certainly without regret. He is 23 years old, extraordinarily well-read in an unconventional way, intellectually sophisticated, but socially undeveloped, and completely uncertain about his future. He returns to Kirkcaldy, to his mother's house, to figure out what to do next. For the next 2 years, he lives at home, reading, thinking, writing notes that do not survive, occasionally traveling to Edinburgh to see what opportunities might present themselves. He is not idle, his mind is constantly working, but he has no position, no income, no clear path forward. It must have been a frustrating time, all this learning and ambition with no outlet. He is too independent to seek ordination as a minister, which his Snell scholarship might have pointed toward. He has no family connections to secure a government position. The academic world seems closed to him without more deliberate effort. And then, through family connections and his growing reputation among Edinburgh intellectuals as a brilliant young scholar with something to say, an opportunity arrives that will change everything. Chapter 4: Edinburgh Lectures and Hume's Friendship. In 1748, through the patronage of Lord Kames, a prominent Scottish judge and philosopher who has heard good things about the young man from Glasgow, Smith is invited to deliver a series of public lectures in Edinburgh. This is a significant opportunity for someone in Smith's position. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, a city of lawyers and judges, ministers and merchants, professors and physicians, a place where ideas matter and where a young man with talent can make his name if he seizes the chance. The lectures are not sponsored by the university, but are public subscriptions, meaning that people pay to attend, a common arrangement that allows lecturers to earn money and audiences to hear new ideas outside the formal academic structure. Smith's lectures are nominally on rhetoric and belles lettres, the art of effective communication and the nature of literary achievement. He discusses style, structure, the qualities that make writing persuasive or moving. But the lectures are also about much more than literary technique. Smith uses these talks to begin developing his own distinctive philosophy, a way of understanding human nature through sympathy and imagination, a conviction that people are fundamentally social beings whose judgments and behaviors are shaped by their interactions with others, by their desire for approbation and their fear of disapproval. He explores how language itself is a social creation, how communication depends on shared understandings and fellow feeling. The lectures are a considerable success. Smith proves to be an engaging speaker despite, or perhaps partly because of, his odd mannerisms. He speaks without notes, pacing and gesturing, sometimes talking to the air as if working out ideas in real time. He has a gift for clear explanation, for making complex ideas accessible without oversimplifying them, for using vivid examples drawn from literature and history. He shows genuine passion for his subject. The Edinburgh audience, sophisticated and demanding, is impressed. Smith begins to build a reputation as a rising intellectual figure. More importantly for his personal development, it is during this period that Smith meets David Hume in person. The meeting probably occurs in 1750, and it marks the beginning of one of the great intellectual friendships of the 18th century. Hume is a few years older than Smith, already famous, or rather infamous, for his philosophical skepticism and his religious heterodoxy. He has published his treatise and his more popular essays, moral and political. He is regarded with suspicion by the devout, but admired by freethinkers. The two men are introduced, probably by a mutual friend in Edinburgh's literary circles, and they recognize in each other kindred spirits, brilliant, independent-minded, committed to free inquiry, skeptical of received opinions. Thus begins a friendship that will last 26 years, until Hume's death in 1776. They will correspond regularly when separated, exchanging ideas about philosophy and politics and economics. They will visit each other frequently, dining together, walking together, engaging in the kind of deep conversation that sharpens thinking and strengthens bonds. They will support each other through controversies and disappointments. When Hume is attacked for his religious views, Smith will defend him. When Smith's books are published, Hume will be among the first readers and most perceptive critics. Their friendship is built on mutual respect, shared values, genuine affection, and an absolute commitment to truth-seeking, regardless of where it leads. It is one of the finest ornaments of both their lives, a model of what philosophical friendship can be. The Edinburgh lectures continue for several years, giving Smith both income and visibility. His reputation grows steadily, and in 1751, this reputation leads to an offer that will bring him back to the place where he had been happiest as a student. Chapter 5. Return to Glasgow, Professor Smith. In 1751, largely on the strength of his Edinburgh lectures and his growing reputation as an original thinker and effective teacher, Adam Smith is appointed Professor of Logic at the University of Glasgow. He is 28 years old, unmarried, devoted to his scholarly work, and deeply pleased to be returning to the institution where he had been so happy as a student. The appointment is really a stepping stone. Everyone understands this. When the chair of moral philosophy becomes vacant, it will be offered to Smith, and indeed, this happens the very next year. In 1752, Smith is promoted to Professor of Moral Philosophy, the chair that Francis Hutcheson had held, the most prestigious position in the university. He will occupy it for the next 12 years, from 1752 to 1764, and these will be, by his own later account, the happiest and most productive years of his life. Here is a man who has found his calling, teaching subjects he loves, to students who are eager to learn, in a city he admires, among colleagues he respects. His schedule is demanding. He lectures daily at 7:30 in the morning to classes of up to 90 students, most of them boys of 14 to 16 years old. This may seem shockingly young to modern sensibilities, but it was standard for Scottish universities at the time. Then he lectures again 3 times a week from 11 to noon. His lectures cover an extraordinary range of subjects: natural theology, which explores the relationship between religion and reason; ethics, which examines the foundations of moral judgment; jurisprudence, which analyzes the nature of law and justice; and political economy, which investigates how nations become wealthy. This is the traditional curriculum of moral philosophy, but Smith approaches it with fresh energy and original insight. Although his lectures are delivered in English, following Hutcheson's example, the level of sophistication is extraordinarily high for such a young audience. Smith treats his teenage students as serious thinkers, capable of grappling with complex ideas. He uses the Socratic method, asking questions, encouraging debate, challenging assumptions. His students later recall him as demanding but inspiring, passionate about his subject, willing to engage seriously with their questions and objections. In the afternoons, Smith attends to university business. He serves on numerous committees, helps administer the college, participates in hiring decisions, is elected Dean of Faculty in 1758 in recognition of his administrative abilities as well as his scholarly reputation. In the evenings, he participates in the vibrant intellectual and social life of Glasgow. He joins clubs dedicated to discussion of philosophy and politics. He dines with merchants and lawyers, engaging in the kind of conversation and debate that sharpens thinking. He maintains his friendship with Hume, who lives in Edinburgh, through regular visits and correspondence. This is also when Smith begins to truly develop the ideas that will define his work and change intellectual history. His lectures on ethics, which he delivers year after year, refining and expanding them, will form the basis of the Theory of Moral Sentiments, his first major book. His lectures on jurisprudence and political economy, less polished but full of original insights, will eventually, after much revision and expansion, become The Wealth of Nations. But in these Glasgow years, he is still forming ideas, testing them in front of students, revising them in light of objections and new information. Smith becomes close friends with several important figures during these Glasgow years. There is Joseph Black, a pioneering chemist who is making fundamental discoveries about heat and carbon dioxide. There is James Watt, a mathematical instrument maker for the university who will later perfect the steam engine and help launch the industrial Revolution. There is Andrew Cochrane, a prosperous merchant and former provost of Glasgow, who founded the famous political economy club, where merchants and professors meet to discuss trade and policy. From Cochrane and other merchants, Smith learns the practical details of trade and commerce, how bills of exchange work, what determines prices, how credit functions, the realities of business that will give such texture and credibility to his later economic analysis. Chapter 6. The Theory of Moral Sentiments and Instant Fame. In 1759, drawing on more than a dozen years of lecturing and thinking about ethics, Adam Smith publishes his first major book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. He is 36 years old, and the book establishes him immediately as one of the leading philosophers of his age, a thinker to be taken seriously, someone contributing important new ideas to the oldest questions of moral philosophy. The central argument of the book is both simple in its core insight and profound in its implications. Smith asks, how do we make moral judgments? How do we decide what is right and what is wrong? What actions are praiseworthy and what actions deserve blame? His answer departs from prevailing theories of his time. He argues that we do so through sympathy, through our capacity to imaginatively enter into the feelings of others. When we see someone suffering, we imagine what it would be like to suffer as they do. And this imaginative sympathy is the foundation of our moral responses. When we see someone experiencing joy, we share in that joy through the same mechanism. This is not just passive feeling, but active imagination. But Smith goes further and introduces one of his most original concepts, the impartial spectator. This is an imaginary observer within our own consciousness who watches and judges our actions as if from outside. We internalize the reactions of others. We develop a kind of inner judge who holds us to moral standards. This is how conscience works, Smith argues, not through divine command or abstract reason, but through our social nature, our need for approval, and our capacity for self-reflection. We want to see ourselves as others see us, and more than that, we want to see ourselves as an idealized, impartial observer would see us. Smith identifies several key virtues that emerge from these moral sentiments. Prudence is the care for our own welfare, looking out for our own interests in a reasonable and far-sighted way. Justice is the restraint that prevents us from harming others, the basic foundation without which society cannot exist. Beneficence is the active promotion of others' happiness, going beyond merely avoiding harm to actively doing good. Self-command is the ability to control our passions and act with propriety, even when our immediate feelings urge us in another direction. These virtues are not imposed from outside by God or society. They arise naturally from the structure of human psychology and social interaction. The book is remarkably rich and subtle, full of psychological observations and literary examples. Smith writes beautifully, with a kind of cadenced prose that makes philosophical arguments readable and even moving. He explores how we judge not only actions, but also the sentiments that motivate actions. He examines the corruption of moral sentiments that comes from admiring the rich and great merely because of their wealth and status, discusses the influence of custom and fashion on moral judgments. He surveys different systems of moral philosophy, from ancient Stoics to modern sentimentalists, explaining what he thinks each gets right and wrong. The book is an immediate success beyond Smith's expectations. It is reviewed favorably in leading journals. It is discussed widely in intellectual circles. It goes through multiple editions in Smith's lifetime, with the sixth and final edition appearing in 1790, the year of his death. David Hume writes to Smith expressing his delight at the book's reception, noting with amusement that even bishops are buying it eagerly. This is significant, given that Hume's own philosophical works were often condemned by religious authorities for their skepticism. Smith's book, while certainly unorthodox in some respects and certainly naturalistic in its approach, is careful enough in its formulations to avoid giving deep offense to religious readers. The theory of moral sentiments makes Smith famous across Europe. He receives letters from admirers in France and Germany. He is recognized as a major thinker, someone contributing important new ideas to moral philosophy. Philosophers engage seriously with his arguments, and the book's success leads directly to the next great turn in his life, an opportunity that will take him away from his beloved Glasgow, but will ultimately provide him the time and resources to write his second great book. Chapter 7. The Grand Tour Travels with a Duke. Among the admiring readers of The Theory of Moral Sentiments is Charles Townshend, a rising politician in the British government who has married the widowed Countess of Dalkeith. Townshend is impressed by Smith's work and his reputation as a teacher, and he conceives the idea of hiring Smith as tutor to his stepson, the young Duke of Buccleuch, who is approaching the age when wealthy young aristocrats traditionally made a grand tour of the continent to complete their education. The position comes with an extremely generous offer, £300 per year for life, far more than Smith earns as a professor, and the salary will continue even after the tutorship ends. Moreover, the job will involve extensive travel in France and possibly other parts of Europe, an opportunity to see the world, to meet the leading thinkers of the continent, to broaden his horizons. Smith is torn. He loves Glasgow, loves teaching, loves his students and colleagues. But £300 for life is genuine financial security, something he has never had. It would allow him to support his mother properly, to buy books without worry, eventually to retire and devote himself entirely to writing. After some soul-searching and consultation with friends, including Hume, Smith accepts the offer. In early 1764, he formally resigns his professorship at Glasgow. His colleagues give him a farewell dinner. His students present him with a testimonial. He packs his belongings, says goodbye to his mother, who will stay in Scotland, and sets off with the young Duke of Buccleuch and his younger brother. They travel first to France, landing at Calais, and then making their way south to Toulouse in the sunny southwest. The initial months are difficult for Smith. His French is adequate for reading, but not yet fluent for conversation. The social life in Toulouse is limited. The locals are pleasant, but not particularly intellectually stimulating. He finds himself at loose ends, missing the structured life of Glasgow, uncertain how to occupy his time beyond the few hours a day spent on the Duke's education. In a letter to Hume, written with wry humor, he confesses that he has begun writing a book in order to pass the time and avoid going mad with boredom. This is the book that will eventually become The Wealth of Nations, though it will take him another 12 years of work to complete it. But as Smith's French improves, and as he and his charges make more connections, the experience becomes richer and more rewarding. They travel to Geneva, where Smith meets Voltaire, perhaps the most famous intellectual in Europe, the great satirist and champion of reason and tolerance. Voltaire is in his 70s now, living in exile from France, still writing, still fighting against what he sees as superstition and tyranny. Smith is impressed by the old man's vigor and wit, though they disagree on some philosophical points. The party spends nearly 2 years in France, much of it in Paris, the intellectual center of Europe. Here Smith is introduced to the physiocrats, a group of French economists who argue that agriculture is the sole source of wealth, that manufacturing merely transforms what agriculture produces. Their leader, François Quesnay, is a physician to Louis XV and a systematic thinker about economic life who has constructed elaborate economic tables trying to show how wealth circulates through society. Smith disagrees with the physiocrats' emphasis on agriculture as the only productive sector, but he is stimulated by their arguments, by their attempt to understand the economy as a kind of system with its own laws and regularities, by their opposition to mercantilism and their advocacy of free trade. In Paris, Smith also meets Anne Robert Jacques Turgot, a brilliant economist and administrator who will briefly serve as France's Controller General of Finances and attempt ambitious economic reforms before being dismissed by reactionary forces. He meets other philosophes, the brilliant and controversial intellectuals of the French Enlightenment, including d'Alembert, Helvetius, and others. He even meets Benjamin Franklin, who is in Paris representing Pennsylvania's interests, a practical scientist and political thinker whose down-to-earth wisdom appeals to Smith. These encounters broaden Smith's horizons enormously, expose him to different ways of thinking about political economy and social organization, give him material and ideas that will enrich the wealth of nations. He is seeing firsthand how different European nations organize their economies, what policies they pursue, what results they achieve. The Grand Tour is cut short abruptly and tragically in October 1766, when the Duke's younger brother suddenly falls ill and dies. The party returns to London in a somber mood. The tutorship is over after less than 3 years, but Smith's generous life pension continues as promised. He is, now, at age 43, financially secure for the first time in his life, free to devote himself entirely to his writing. Chapter 8. Kirkcaldy, The Long Labor. Smith returns to Kirkcaldy in 1767 to live with his mother in the house where he had grown up. He is 44 years old, a confirmed bachelor showing no signs of ever marrying, completely devoted to his intellectual work. He will spend the next 6 years in this small Scottish town, living quietly, writing, revising, expanding what he had begun in Toulouse into a comprehensive treatise on political economy that will eventually shake the world. These are quiet years, almost monastic in their routine and simplicity. Smith rises early, works at his writing desk for hours, breaks for a simple meal, returns to his desk. He takes long walks along the shore of the Firth of Forth to think, pacing and muttering to himself, working out arguments, sometimes returning to his desk to scribble notes, sometimes simply clarifying his thoughts. His mother manages the household, ensuring he is fed and comfortable, protecting him from interruptions, understanding that he is engaged in important work even if she does not fully comprehend what he is writing about. He sees few people outside his immediate family during these years. He has little social life. The work is slow, painstaking, all-consuming. He is attempting something unprecedented in scope and ambition, a systematic explanation of how economic life operates, how nations become wealthy, what policies promote prosperity and what policies hinder it, how the division of labor increases productivity, how markets coordinate the activities of millions of individuals who do not know each other and have no particular concern for each other's welfare. His method combines philosophical reflection with empirical observation, historical research with contemporary analysis. He draws on his vast reading in history and travel literature, on his conversations years ago with Glasgow merchants, on his observations in France, on his understanding of human psychology from the theory of moral sentiments. He is trying to show how individual actions, motivated largely by self-interest, can produce collective benefits through the mechanism of competitive markets. He is trying to explain the division of labor, the role of capital accumulation, the nature of wages and profits and rent, the effects of monopolies and tariffs and government regulation. He is trying to demolish mercantilism, the prevailing economic doctrine that sees wealth as a matter of accumulating gold and silver through favorable trade balances. It is an enormously ambitious project, and Smith knows it. He revises constantly, discards entire sections, reorganizes the structure, adds new material, refines his arguments. He reads new books that appear on economics and history, incorporating insights, responding to arguments. In 1773, after 6 years in Kirkcaldy, he travels to London, taking his voluminous manuscript with him, still working, still unsatisfied with parts of it. He stays in London for the next 3 years, joining literary circles, renewing old friendships, making new acquaintances among politicians and writers. He becomes close with Edward Gibbon, who is working on his massive decline and fall of the Roman Empire, one of the monuments of 18th century historiography. They dine together regularly, discuss their work, commiserate about the difficulties of bringing large projects to completion. He becomes friendly with Edmund Burke, the Irish political philosopher and parliamentarian whose speeches on America and India will later become classics of political thought. He moves in circles where his ideas are taken seriously, where he can discuss political economy with people who understand its importance. But mostly, he works on the book, day after day, month after month. The manuscript grows to enormous length, nearly 1,000 pages. He worries it is too long, too detailed, too likely to bore readers. Friends who read sections reassure him, but he continues to worry. Finally, in March 1776, after 9 years of intensive labor since returning from France, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations is published in 2 large volumes by William Strahan and Thomas Cadell in London. Chapter 9: The Wealth of Nations and the Science of Prosperity. The publication of The Wealth of Nations in March 1776 marks a watershed moment in the history of economic thought, though few people realize it immediately. The book is large, dense, sometimes repetitive, full of historical digressions and detailed examples. It is not an easy read, but it contains ideas of extraordinary power and originality. And once people begin to grasp what Smith is arguing, the response is overwhelmingly positive. The book is carefully structured across 5 books. The first book examines the division of labor and how it increases productivity, using the famous example of a pin factory, where specialization allows 10 workers to make tens of thousands of pins per day, when a single worker working alone could barely make 20. Smith then explains how markets coordinate this divided labor through the mechanism of prices, how supply and demand interact, how competition drives prices toward their natural levels. The second book deals with capital accumulation, explaining how savings are invested in productive enterprises, how capital grows over time, how different uses of capital contribute differently to economic growth. The third book offers a history of economic development in Europe from the fall of the Roman Empire to Smith's own time, showing how agriculture, commerce, and manufacturing interacted and influenced each other. The fourth book is Smith's sustained attack on mercantilism, the prevailing economic doctrine of European governments. Mercantilists believe that national wealth consists of accumulating gold and silver, that exports should be maximized and imports minimized, that colonies exist primarily to benefit the mother country, that government should closely regulate economic life to achieve favorable trade balances. Smith systematically demolishes these ideas, arguing that true wealth consists not of precious metals, but of the goods and services people consume, that trade is mutually beneficial rather than zero-sum, that restrictions on trade harm both parties, that the elaborate system of tariffs and monopolies and regulations serves primarily to benefit special interests at the expense of the general public. The fifth book examines the proper role of government, arguing that the state has important but limited functions, providing defense, administering justice, supporting certain public works and institutions that private enterprise will not support because they are not profitable enough. Smith also discusses taxation, arguing for principles that taxes should be proportionate to income, certain rather than arbitrary, convenient to pay, and economical to collect. Throughout the book, Smith makes his case with an extraordinary combination of philosophical argument, historical example, and contemporary observation. He discusses the price of corn in medieval England, the wages of laborers in modern Scotland, the trade policies of Spain and Holland, the banking practices of Amsterdam, the economic effects of the English poor laws. This grounding in concrete reality makes his abstract arguments convincing in a way that purely theoretical economics never could. Most famously, Smith articulates the idea of the invisible hand, though he uses this exact phrase only once in the entire book. His point is that when individuals pursue their own economic advantage in a competitive market, they are led as if by an invisible hand to promote the general welfare, even though that is not their intention. The butcher, brewer, and baker provide us our dinner not from benevolence, but from regard to their own interest. Yet we all benefit from their self-interested actions because market competition forces them to serve us well or lose our business. This does not mean Smith endorses greed or believes selfishness is a virtue. He is not making a moral claim, but an analytical one about how markets work under the right institutional conditions. He recognizes repeatedly that markets can fail, that merchants will collude to raise prices if they can, that workers need protection from exploitation, that government has essential roles to play. He is scathing about the behavior of merchants and manufacturers, whom he accuses of constantly conspiring against the public interest and manipulating policy for their own advantage. The book is published in March 1776, the same month that Edward Gibbon publishes the first volume of his Decline and Fall. By coincidence, it is also the year that the American colonies will declare their independence from Britain. Smith's arguments about the costs of trying to maintain colonial monopolies will soon seem prophetic. The first edition sells out within 6 months. By Smith's death in 1790, the book will have gone through 5 editions, each with revisions and additions. It will become the founding text of modern economics, one of the most influential books ever written. Chapter 10, Commissioner of Customs, Life's Ironies. In 1778, 2 years after the publication of The Wealth of Nations and its growing success, Adam Smith receives an unexpected appointment that strikes many observers as deeply ironic. He is named Commissioner of Customs for Scotland, a government position responsible for enforcing import duties, collecting tariffs, and preventing smuggling. The salary is £600 per year, a substantial income that, when combined with his pension from the Duke of Buccleuch, gives him genuine prosperity. The irony is not lost on anyone, including Smith himself. Here's the man who wrote the most devastating critique of mercantilist trade policy, who argued powerfully against tariffs and restrictions on commerce, who had defended smuggling in the wealth of nations as a legitimate response to unjust laws, now employed to enforce those very policies he had criticized. But Smith accepts the position without apparent embarrassment or internal conflict. He needs the income, his pension alone is adequate, but more money means greater security for himself and his mother, the ability to be more generous to relatives and friends in need. Moreover, the job is not overly demanding intellectually. It will leave him time to continue his scholarly work, to prepare new editions of his books, perhaps to write the additional works he has been contemplating. And Smith has never been a hypocrite or an ideologue. He has never argued that tariffs should be immediately abolished, regardless of circumstances. His argument has always been that restrictive trade policies are economically harmful in the long run and should be gradually reduced as circumstances allow and as public opinion can be brought along. In the meantime, the laws exist and must be enforced fairly and honestly. Smith moves to Edinburgh to take up his duties, bringing his elderly mother, now in her 80s, and a cousin, Janet Douglas, to keep house. They settle into a comfortable home in the Canongate, the historic street that runs from Edinburgh Castle down to Holyrood Palace, in the heart of the Old Town. The work of the Customs Board involves attending regular meetings, reviewing reports from customs officers across Scotland, making decisions about particular cases, dealing with merchants who dispute assessments, coordinating with colleagues on policy matters. Smith is conscientious about his duties, if not passionate. He attends meetings regularly, reads the reports carefully, participates in discussions, does his job competently. There is something poignant about this phase of Smith's life. The great theorist of free trade, spending his days administering tariffs and duties, the philosopher of liberty, enforcing restrictions on commerce. But Smith maintains his integrity. He never uses his position for personal advantage, never bends rules for friends or accepts bribes, treats merchants fairly according to the law. He brings to this bureaucratic work the same honesty and dedication he brought to his teaching and writing. His life in Edinburgh settles into a comfortable routine. He rises early, attends to correspondence, goes to the customs house for meetings and business. In the afternoons and evenings, he sees friends, dines out frequently, participates in Edinburgh's vibrant intellectual and social life. His mother is increasingly frail, but still mentally sharp, still the center of his domestic life. He continues to work on revisions to the theory of moral sentiments, preparing new editions, adding material, refining arguments. He corresponds with admirers and critics of the wealth of nations, incorporating insights into subsequent editions. Chapter 11. The Death of Hume and the Grief of Friendship. The year 1776 brings both triumph and tragedy for Adam Smith. In March, his great book is published to acclaim, but in August, his greatest friend dies, and the loss will shadow the rest of Smith's life. David Hume had been ill for some time with what was probably cancer of the bowel, though 18th century medicine could not diagnose it precisely. He faced his approaching death with characteristic serenity, good humor, and complete absence of religious fear or hope. This last quality, his refusal to make any concession to religious orthodoxy, even as death approached, scandalized many and confirmed the worst suspicions of his enemies. Smith visited Hume frequently during his final illness. They had been friends for 26 years, had supported each other through controversies, had shared their deepest thoughts, had enjoyed countless hours of conversation and debate. Hume was dying, and they both knew it. But Hume insisted on maintaining his spirits, joking with visitors, discussing philosophy, refusing to become morbid or self-pitying. Smith was deeply moved by his friend's courage and composure. Hume died on August 25, 1776. Smith was named his literary executor, responsible for publishing Hume's remaining works and managing his literary legacy. This brought Smith immediately into controversy. Hume had left instructions for the publication of his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, his most radical examination of religious belief, a work that subjected the arguments for God's existence to devastating skeptical analysis. Smith hesitated, worried that publishing the dialogues would harm Hume's reputation and possibly endanger Smith himself. Eventually, the work was published by Hume's nephew, and it did indeed cause scandal. But Smith took another action that brought him even more criticism. He wrote a brief letter to Hume's publisher describing Hume's final days and character. The letter was published and became famous or infamous. Smith described Hume as approaching as nearly to the idea of a perfectly wise and virtuous man as perhaps the nature of human frailty will permit. Coming from anyone, this would be high praise. Coming about someone widely regarded as an atheist, or at best a skeptic who had attacked Christianity, it was seen by many as shocking, even blasphemous. Smith was attacked in pamphlets and from pulpits. How could he praise an infidel so highly? How could he hold up as a model of virtue someone who rejected revealed religion? What did this say about Smith's own religious beliefs? The controversy raged for months. Smith's friends worried that his reputation would be damaged, that his customs position might be in jeopardy. But Smith refused to retract or qualify what he had written. His loyalty to Hume was complete and principled. He had written the truth as he saw it, and he would stand by it regardless of criticism. The loss of Hume left a permanent void in Smith's life. There were other friends, certainly. He was not alone, but none with whom he could speak so freely. None who understood him so well. None who shared so completely his commitment to free inquiry and intellectual honesty. The letters they had exchanged over the years, which might have provided invaluable insight into both men's thinking, were lost. Hume apparently destroyed them before his death, possibly at Smith's request, fearing they contained too much frank discussion of religion and politics that could be used against either man. This destruction is one of the great losses to intellectual history, but it reflects the genuine dangers that heterodox thinkers faced in the 18th century. Smith mourned Hume deeply and genuinely. Friends noticed that he seemed diminished after Hume's death, older, more isolated. He continued his work, his customs duties, his social obligations, but something had changed. The person who knew him best, who had believed in him most completely, was gone. Chapter 12: Margaret's Death and the Solitude of Age. For the next several years, Smith continues his life in Edinburgh. He attends to his customs duties conscientiously. He participates in the intellectual life of the city, which remains vibrant. He sees his old friend Adam Ferguson regularly. He dines at clubs and private homes. He continues revising the theory of moral sentiments, preparing what will be the 6th and final edition during his lifetime. But he is growing older, more set in his ways, more dependent on routine. And then in 1784, another devastating loss strikes. Margaret Douglas Smith, Adam's mother, dies at the remarkable age of 90. She had been with him his entire life, the one absolute constant. She had raised him alone after his father's death, had supported his education, had waited patiently during his years at Oxford and in France, had managed his household in Glasgow and later in Edinburgh, had never complained about his unmarried state or his absorption in his work. The bond between them had been extraordinarily close, perhaps too close by modern psychological standards. Smith never married, never had children, devoted himself entirely to his work and to his mother. Whether this was cause or effect of their closeness, we cannot know. Some have speculated about the psychological dynamics, whether Margaret's devotion became smothering, whether Smith's attachment prevented him from forming other intimate relationships. But the historical record shows only that they lived together for nearly 60 years, that he was devoted to her, that her death left him bereft. Smith is 61 years old when his mother dies, alone in a way he has never been before. Friends worry about him. He seems diminished, older suddenly, less engaged with the world. The house in the Canongate feels empty, despite the presence of his cousin Janet Douglas, who continues to keep house for him. He continues his duties, his work, but with less energy, less enthusiasm. Yet even in grief, Smith continues working. He is preparing the 6th edition of the Theory of Moral Sentiments, making significant additions and revisions, particularly to the final part of the book, dealing with different systems of moral philosophy. He wants to clarify his arguments, respond to critics who have misunderstood him, position his work more clearly in relation to other traditions of thought. He is also supposedly working on 2 other major books. One, a systematic treatise on jurisprudence and law building on his Glasgow lectures. Another, a comprehensive work on the sciences and arts. But his health is beginning to fail, and he must suspect he will not live to complete these ambitious projects. Chapter 13, Elder Statesman and Final Honors. Despite his personal losses and declining health, Smith's reputation continues to grow throughout the 1780s. The Wealth of Nations is being read across Europe and in the newly independent United States of America. Political leaders consult it when considering economic policy. The younger generation of philosophers and economists treat him with reverence. He has become a kind of elder statesman of letters, respected, influential, secure in his legacy even while still alive. In 1787, the University of Glasgow elects him rector, an honorary position chosen by the students, a ceremonial role, but one that nonetheless pleases him greatly. It is a kind of homecoming, an acknowledgement from the institution where he had been so happy as both student and professor decades earlier. He travels to Glasgow for the installation ceremony despite his failing health, clearly moved by the honor, by the affection shown him by a new generation of students who know him only through his books and his reputation. He continues to correspond with admirers and critics from across Europe. Young economists write asking questions about the wealth of nations, seeking clarification of particular arguments. Continental philosophers engage with the theory of moral sentiments, trying to understand how his moral philosophy relates to his political economy. Smith responds when he has the energy, always courteous, often illuminating, occasionally showing flashes of the brilliance that characterized his prime. But his health is genuinely failing now. He suffers from chronic intestinal problems, likely the same condition that killed Hume, though we cannot be certain. He experiences increasing pain and weakness. There are days when he cannot rise from bed, when even the effort of writing a brief letter exhausts him. He knows his time is limited. Knowing that death is approaching, Smith makes careful preparations. He has lived frugally, despite his good income, but he has also been generous, and he has not accumulated great wealth. What he has will go to designated relatives and to charity. More importantly, he gives explicit instructions about his papers to his literary executors, his friends Joseph Black, the chemist, and James Hutton, the geologist. The instructions are stark and uncompromising. They are to burn all his manuscripts and notes except for a few specified works that are ready for publication. When Smith dies, Black and Hutton will carry out these instructions faithfully, burning 16 volumes of manuscripts. We can only speculate about what was lost. Were there drafts of the proposed works on jurisprudence and the sciences? Were there personal reflections, autobiographical notes, private thoughts on controversial subjects? We will never know. Smith wanted to be judged by his finished work, not by rough drafts and incomplete thoughts. Chapter 14. The Final Revisions. In the late 1780s, even as his body fails, Smith's mind remains active. He works on the 6th edition of the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which will be published in 1790, the year of his death. The revisions are substantial, particularly the additions to Part 6 on the character of virtue and to Part 7 on systems of moral philosophy. He is taking stock, trying to ensure his moral philosophy is properly understood, trying to clarify the relationship between his two great works. Some readers have claimed to see a contradiction between the two books. The Theory of Moral Sentiments emphasizes sympathy, benevolence, moral sentiment, the social nature of human beings. The Wealth of Nations emphasizes self-interest, competition, the pursuit of profit. How can both be true? Isn't there an Adam Smith problem, as some German scholars have called it? But Smith sees no contradiction, and the revisions he makes to the 6th edition of the Theory of Moral Sentiments make this clear. Both books are about the same fundamental question: how do human beings live together successfully? The theory examines the psychological and social foundations of morality, how we develop conscience and virtue, how we judge actions and character. The Wealth of Nations examines the economic institutions that allow people to cooperate productively, even when they are not motivated primarily by benevolence. Together, they form a comprehensive view of social life. In the additions to the 6th edition, Smith writes passages that seem almost like a self-portrait, or at least an ideal he has tried to live up to. He describes the man of real constancy and firmness, the wise and just man who has learned self-command, who maintains his composure in prosperity and adversity, before friends and enemies, who has been tested by experience and has developed the strength to endure. It is moving to read these passages, knowing they were written by a man facing his own death, taking stock of his own life, trying perhaps to meet his own ideals. In June of 1790, Smith's condition worsens significantly. The pain becomes more constant and severe. He becomes bedridden, unable to attend to his customs duties, unable even to receive visitors for more than brief periods. The Customs Board grants him leave, his colleagues understanding that he will not recover. He puts his affairs in order as much as he is able. He says his goodbyes to friends who come to see him one last time. On July 17, 1790, Adam Smith dies in his house in Edinburgh's Canongate. He is 67 years old, conscious and rational almost to the end. The funeral is simple, as Smith would have wished. There is no state ceremony, no grand memorial service. He is buried in the Canongate Kirkyard, the cemetery attached to the old church near his house. The grave is marked with a simple monument, inscribed with his name, his dates, and a single description: author of The Wealth of Nations. It is telling what is included and what is left out. No mention of the theory of moral sentiments, the book he himself thought was better, the book he revised more carefully. No mention of his role as Commissioner of Customs. No mention of his professorship at Glasgow. Just the one work that has already, only 14 years after its publication, come to define his legacy in the public mind. The death does not cause widespread public mourning. Smith was not a political figure, not a man of dramatic public action. He was a scholar, a thinker, a writer. His books will speak for him far more powerfully than any memorial service could. And indeed they do. Chapter 15: The Philosopher Who Changed the World. In the decades after Smith's death, The Wealth of Nations becomes increasingly influential as the Industrial Revolution transforms Europe and North America. His arguments for free trade, for the division of labor, for the productive power of markets, all seem vindicated by the explosive economic growth of the 19th century. Politicians quote him, economists build on his work. He becomes enshrined as the founder of a discipline, the father of economics. But this canonization comes at a cost. Smith is often simplified, reduced to a few slogans that lose the nuance and complexity of his actual arguments. The invisible hand becomes a kind of magical force that always produces optimal outcomes, when Smith saw it as a limited principle operating under specific institutional conditions. Self-interest becomes greed, when Smith distinguished clearly between prudent self-interest and selfish vice. Laissez-faire becomes a dogma when Smith recognized many legitimate roles for government and was sharply critical of unrestrained merchant power. People who have not read him carefully claim him for their own positions. Advocates of unrestrained capitalism invoke his name while ignoring his warnings about monopoly, his sympathy for workers, his insistence on the importance of education and justice and infrastructure. Critics attack him as the prophet of greed while overlooking his profound work on moral philosophy, his understanding that economic life is embedded in social and moral life. The truth is that Adam Smith was more complex, more humane, more interesting than most of his later interpreters have acknowledged. He was a moral philosopher first and an economist second. He believed in virtue and in commerce, in sympathy and in self-interest, in freedom and in regulation where necessary. He understood that you could not understand markets without understanding human nature, that political economy was inseparable from moral philosophy. His influence extends far beyond economics. His method of naturalistic social inquiry influenced the development of sociology and anthropology. His ideas about sympathy and moral psychology contributed to the development of modern moral philosophy. His political thought helped shape the liberal tradition, the idea that individuals should be free to pursue their own conceptions of the good within a framework of just laws. Who was Adam Smith beyond the ideas? He was an unusual man, absent-minded to an extreme degree, walking the streets talking to himself, lost in thought, oblivious to appearances. He was never tall or handsome, dressed simply, cared nothing for fashion. He never married, never had romantic relationships that we know of. He lived with his mother for nearly 60 years in a relationship of mutual devotion that was the center of his emotional life. Yet he was not unsociable. He had close friends, enjoyed good conversation, appreciated wit and humor. His letters show warmth and loyalty. He was generous with money, giving quietly to those in need, supporting relatives. When he died, it was discovered that his charitable donations had consumed most of his substantial income over the years. He was devoted to truth above all else, willing to follow arguments wherever they led, willing to defend unpopular positions if he believed them correct, willing to stand by his principles even when attacked. His defense of Hume's character in the face of religious outrage showed moral courage. His systematic destruction of mercantilism, despite its popularity with powerful interests, showed intellectual courage. Perhaps the deepest lesson of Adam Smith's life is that a life devoted to careful thought, to honest inquiry, to the patient pursuit of understanding is a life well lived. That you need not conquer nations or accumulate fortunes to matter. That ideas, well developed and clearly expressed, can change the world more surely than armies or gold. The boy who was briefly kidnapped became instead a different kind of traveler, journeying through the realm of ideas, mapping territory that had been dark and making it legible, showing us patterns we had not seen before, helping us understand ourselves and the intricate web of cooperation that allows human society to flourish. Adam Smith died, but his questions live on, and as long as we care about prosperity and justice, about freedom and virtue, about how to build good societies and live good lives, we will continue to grapple with the problems that occupied that quiet, brilliant, absent-minded man who spent his life trying to understand the wealth of nations and the sentiments of the human heart.